My name is Ellen Carter, and I'm 38 years old. I never imagined I'd be standing at my father's birthday party, completely invisible in my own family. Everyone was gathered around my younger brother Cole, laughing, toasting, praising him like he was the second coming of Steve Jobs. When I walked in, my mom barely looked up. My dad gave me a quick side hug and said, "Your brother's doing great things. We're so proud of him." That was it. I smiled, quietly. I'd been through this 100 times before, and I remember thinking, if being good, kind, and successful still isn't enough to be seen, then maybe I don't need to be seen by them at all. Before I take you any deeper, let me ask, where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about family betrayal and what it takes to finally set yourself free. After that night, I sat in my car for almost 30 minutes, not crying, not angry, just quiet. I watched the party lights through the windshield as Cole made his toast inside. I could picture it. Him raising his glass, everyone smiling, my parents beaming like they'd raised a genius. Meanwhile, I was out here, in the same dress I wore to an investor conference the week before, holding a bottle of wine I brought as a gift. One they never even noticed. You might be wondering, what kind of woman gets excluded from her own family while doing everything right? That would be me. By most standards, I've lived a successful life. I'm the vice president of strategic growth at a major financial firm. I've led teams, closed multi-million-dollar partnerships, and mentored dozens of young women breaking into the industry. My colleagues respect me. My friends call me grounded. But in my family's eyes, I've always been too serious, too intense, not fun like Cole. Cole, the golden child. The artist-turned-coffee shop manager who never paid rent a day in his life and still got celebrated for finding his own path. When we were younger, I thought the gap between us would close with time, that once we became adults my hard work would mean something, that I'd walk into a room and my parents would light up the way they do when Cole walks in. But it never happened. The older we got, the clearer the divide became. Let me give you an example. A few years ago, I won a national award in my field. It was a big deal. I flew to D.C., stood on a stage in front of hundreds of industry leaders, and gave a speech that was quoted in Forbes the next day. I was proud, nervous, hopeful that this time, maybe they'd see me. I called my mom that night from the hotel. She picked up halfway through the second ring. "Hi, honey, I can't talk long. We're helping Cole get his car fixed. What's up?" I told her about the award, about the speech, about how the CEO of our parent company had come up to shake my hand afterward. There was a pause. Then she said, "That's nice. But Cole's thinking of starting a podcast. I think it's really going to help him express himself." That's when it hit me. This wasn't about merit or milestones. It was about a story my parents had chosen to believe long ago. One where Cole was the star, and I was just a supporting character, useful, reliable, but never radiant. I wish I could say I learned to let go, that I stopped hoping for something different. But the truth is, I kept showing up. I kept trying. I kept thinking that maybe, just maybe, the next holiday, the next call, the next family gathering would be different. But that night at the birthday party, something cracked. When my dad gave that quick hug and turned away, when my mother didn't even ask how I'd been, when the attention poured over Cole like champagne, it all clicked into place. Not just the hurt, not just the favoritism, but the fact that I had been willingly walking into this pattern again and again, hoping for people to become someone they never promised to be. And that realization, it didn't break me. It woke me up. I wasn't always invisible. There was a time when I was younger that I thought my parents saw me, really saw me. I'd bring home straight A's and place first in math competitions. My bedroom wall was lined with ribbons and certificates, carefully arranged in neat rows, like tiny pieces of proof that I was worthy of their attention. I remember one afternoon in 7th grade I got invited to a regional debate event. It was a big deal. I came home holding the letter in my hand, smiling so wide my cheeks hurt. My mom was in the kitchen folding laundry. My dad was watching a game in the living room. I stood there, excited, waiting for a reaction. They glanced up. "That's great, honey," Mom said, barely pausing. "Oh, your brother needs help with his science fair project. Can you give him a hand?" Cole had forgotten to glue his volcano together. I stayed up until midnight helping him rebuild it. At school, his display won first place. At home, my name was never mentioned. That was the pattern. I achieved, I delivered, I kept the wheels turning. Cole, sparkled. He'd come down the stairs with a scribbled song lyric or an idea for a mural, and suddenly the house would turn into a stage. My parents would light up, my mother's voice would soften, my father would lean in. "He's so creative," they'd say. "Such a bright soul." I wasn't jealous, not exactly. I was confused. I didn't understand how someone could give and still feel unseen. I thought if I was perfect enough, quiet, helpful, reliable, they would eventually say the words I longed to hear. "We're proud of you, Ellen." But they never came. Instead, I became the safe one. The one they leaned on for bills, advice, paperwork, problems. I handled Cole's college application forms. I drove him to job interviews. I proofread my mom's resume when she went back to work part-time. I filed my father's taxes for 3 years straight. They never asked if I had time. They just assumed I'd do it, because I always had. I didn't know it back then, but every time I said yes to one more thing, I was slowly making myself smaller, easier to overlook, more convenient to forget. Looking back now, I see it clearly. There's a photo in the hallway of our childhood home. It's from a 4th of July barbecue. Everyone's in red, white, and blue. My parents are smiling. Cole is holding a sparkler. I'm in the back, half out of frame, holding 2 plates of food. I hadn't even realized it until a few years ago. That's how I existed, half in the picture, fully holding the weight. So when people ask why I still showed up to that birthday party, why I brought the wine and wore the smile, the answer is simple. Because for most of my life, I believed that if I just did enough, I'd earn a place in the center. But the truth is, some families don't have centers. They have spotlights. And if you're not the one standing in it, you're left in the dark, applauding someone else's performance. And I'd been clapping for too long. It's funny how people only see what you show them. From the outside, my life looked polished. I had a high-paying job, lived in a bright condo with floor-to-ceiling windows, and wore tailored suits that made people assume I had it all figured out. And for the most part, I did. Except for the part no one saw. Every month, I sent money home. Not because anyone asked me directly, but because there was always a quiet expectation. The roof needs repair. Cole's rent is behind again. We had to take the dog to the vet. Each sentence wrapped in just enough guilt to make me reach for my checkbook without asking too many questions. I paid for the new dishwasher. I covered Cole's medical bills when he sprained his ankle playing pickup basketball and didn't have insurance. I sent my mom a Visa gift card every Christmas because I knew she'd never buy herself that new winter coat. My name was never mentioned when things got fixed, but somehow when they didn't, the silence pointed at me. I told myself it was love, that this was what families did, looked out for each other. But deep down, I knew. I was the net, the backup plan, the reliable daughter who would never let anyone fall too far. The problem is, even a safety net has limits. I remember this one night, late February, Boston wind rattling my window panes. I was sitting at my desk at 11:40 p.m., still in a blazer, crunching numbers for an emergency board meeting the next morning. My phone buzzed. It was my dad. He never called that late. I picked up, worried. "Ellen, the hot water heater gave out. We need to replace it. It's going to cost a bit. Think you could handle it this week?" "No. How are you?" "No. Is this a bad time?" Just straight to the ask. And what did I do? I opened my laptop, transferred the money, sent him the receipt. Then I stared at the screen for a long time. It wasn't about the money. I could afford it. But what I couldn't afford anymore was this version of love. Transactional, conditional, always on my shoulders. That night, something inside me started to unravel. The next morning, I showed up to that boardroom in full control, nailed my presentation, secured our division another year of funding, and got a standing ovation from our investors. No one in that room had any idea that 10 hours earlier I was wiring money to replace a water heater for a house I hadn't slept in since college. That I was holding up 2 worlds, one professional and sharp, the other personal and invisible, and no one ever stopped to ask what it was costing me. I didn't tell anyone. I smiled, I shook hands, I got into my car and sat in silence. Because this was the rhythm I'd learned. Give, achieve, give again, collapse in private. It's exhausting being the responsible one, not because of the tasks, but because of the loneliness that comes with being taken for granted. You become the person no one checks on because you're always the one holding everyone else together. The thing about emotional distance is, it rarely starts with a dramatic moment. It starts with small things. A call you don't return, a text left on read, a family photo where no one notices you weren't even invited. It starts with forgetting. Not the kind of forgetting that comes from old age or distraction, but the kind that's rooted in indifference. The kind where someone just stops thinking of you when you're not in the room. That's what happened to me. I used to go home for every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every summer barbecue, even when it meant booking the red eye, working from my parents' dining room and pretending I didn't hear the passive-aggressive comments about how much I was missing out on life with all my ambition. I showed up. For years, I showed up. But slowly something shifted. One year, I wasn't asked to help with the Thanksgiving meal like I usually was. The next year, I found out about the family Christmas gathering from a photo posted online. Cole wearing a ridiculous elf sweater, my parents standing proudly behind him. I was thousands of miles away, alone in my apartment, watching it all from my phone. I stared at that picture for hours. I didn't cry. I didn't even text them. I just sat with the realization that maybe they hadn't forgotten me out of spite. Maybe they'd just stopped thinking about me altogether. And that kind of forgetting hurts in a way that's hard to explain. Because it's not loud. It's not cruel. It's just quiet. Like the fading sound of someone walking away and you realizing they're not turning back. I tried to brush it off. I told myself they were busy, that maybe the email got lost, that Cole probably forgot to include me in the group text, that they'd reach out soon. But they didn't. Weeks passed. Then months. No birthday call. No check-in after a big conference I told them about. Nothing. At some point, I realized we hadn't had a real conversation in over 2 years. 2 years. That's the part that gets me even now. The sheer emptiness of that gap. The calls I didn't make because I didn't want to seem needy. The messages I deleted before sending because I didn't want to chase after people who didn't see me. I kept waiting for someone to notice the silence, for someone, anyone, to ask, "Ellen, are you okay?" No one did. And the worst part? I had no idea how to explain it to anyone else. Because how do you tell a friend that your family didn't do anything bad? They just slowly disappeared from your life. There was no fight, no betrayal, just absence. And that kind of loss? It's hard to mourn, because there's no funeral, no closure, just an empty chair at a table you're not even sure you're allowed to sit at anymore. That's when the doubt creeps in. Maybe I was too distant. Maybe I was too ambitious. Maybe I should have tried harder. But the truth is, I did try. I tried more than they'll ever know. And now, I was tired. Tired of shrinking myself to fit into a space I'd already outgrown. Tired of giving love where it was only ever tolerated. Tired of knocking on a door that had quietly closed a long time ago. There's a certain loneliness that comes with being useful. It's the kind of loneliness that doesn't scream. It simmers, quietly, under the surface, like water just before it boils. For years, I convinced myself that my family needed me, that I was essential, that without me things would fall apart. And maybe for a while that was true. But what I didn't realize was that being needed isn't the same as being loved. Needing someone means they fill a gap. Loving someone means you see them, value them, want them around even when there's nothing to fix. I started to notice the difference. When my mom called, it was never to ask how my day was. It was to talk about the mortgage rate or a bill she didn't understand. When my dad texted, it was to ask if I still had access to his online banking. Not to say he missed me, just to say the password wasn't working. And when Cole reached out, which was rare, it was usually something like, "Hey, you know anything about negotiating a lease?" Or, "Can you look over my resume real quick?" I answered. Every time. Even when I was in meetings, even when I was exhausted, even when I felt a part of me quietly pulling away. Because I still believed that maybe, just maybe, if I kept showing up, they'd finally see me as more than a lifeline. But then came the moment that snapped it all into focus. It was a Sunday evening. I had just gotten off a flight from Chicago, where I'd spoken at a Women in Business summit. The applause was still ringing in my ears. I felt proud, maybe even a little bold for once. I walked into my apartment, heels in one hand, suitcase dragging behind me, and noticed I had a voicemail. It was from my mother. Her voice was tight, cold even. She said, "Ellen, we were talking about your grandfather's estate, and we all feel it would be better if Cole handled things. He's more emotionally connected to the family. We just think that makes more sense." I stood there in the dark, phone still pressed to my ear. Emotionally connected? Was that what they called ignoring me for 2 years? I couldn't decide what hurt more, the fact that they excluded me or the fact that I wasn't even surprised. I didn't call back. Instead, I sat on my kitchen floor, suit jacket still on, and whispered to no one in particular, "I don't think I can keep doing this." That was the moment the narrative started to shift. I began to see the truth, not the version I kept rewriting in my head. They didn't see me as the dependable daughter. They saw me as the safety net, the cleanup crew, the one who'd always say yes, no matter how much it cost her. And I had played that role so well for so long, I almost forgot I had a choice. But now I was starting to remember. I didn't owe them a version of myself that bled just to keep the peace. I didn't have to keep paying the emotional tax of their approval, and maybe, just maybe, it wasn't me who was disconnected from the family. Maybe it was them who had chosen not to connect with me. When my grandfather passed, I flew back home for the funeral, unsure of what I was walking into. I hadn't been back to that town in almost 5 years. The streets felt smaller, the air thicker. My parents met me at the church with polite nods and brief hugs. Cole was already there, cracking quiet jokes with a few cousins, his charm turned on like a switch. We sat through the service. I kept my head down. The eulogy was sweet and short, just the way Grandpa would have wanted. He never liked long goodbyes. But what I didn't expect was the second gathering, a smaller one, just family, just blood. They said it was to read the will. I didn't think much of it. My grandfather wasn't wealthy. He lived simply, drove an old truck, wore the same flannel jackets for decades. I assumed it was mostly formality. Then the lawyer opened the folder. To my surprise, most of what little he had, his land, some savings, a vintage camera collection he loved, was left to me. There was even a note, written in his shaky handwriting. It said, "For Ellen, build something of your own. You always had it in you." The room went quiet. I looked up and saw it in their faces. My parents were stunned. Cole blinked like he didn't understand. Then came the pushback. My dad cleared his throat. "Obviously, this is a mistake. Your grandfather was confused near the end." My mom jumped in. "He probably meant for Cole to have the land. Ellen doesn't even live here. It makes no sense." Cole didn't say anything. He just looked at me. I couldn't tell if it was guilt or disbelief. Maybe both. That's when I felt it. That slow burn rising from my chest. Years of silence, of being overlooked, of being used. It didn't explode. It crystallized. I set the letter down gently and said, "Maybe it makes sense because I'm the only one who ever listened to him." My father's jaw tightened. My mother looked away. I kept going. "I was the one who brought him groceries when his knees gave out. I was the one who called him every Sunday, even when he started repeating himself. And I didn't do it for this. I did it because he saw me." My voice didn't shake. It was the first time in a long time that I wasn't afraid of their discomfort. Cole has always been the favorite. That's not news to anyone. But Grandpa saw past the noise. He saw what I carried. No one responded. The silence was louder than any argument. Then, from the far side of the room, I heard the shuffle of a cane. My grandmother, Miriam, stepped forward. Her eyes were clear and sharp, even with time weighing down her spine. "He wasn't confused," she said, her voice firm. "That decision was made months before he passed. He asked me to hold on to the updated document just in case." She handed a second envelope to the lawyer. Inside was a supplemental clause, typed, signed, notarized. It confirmed everything. The land, the money, the message. My parents didn't speak again. They didn't need to. For the first time, I felt like the truth stood with me, not against me. That night, I sat alone in the room I grew up in. The wallpaper was faded. The trophies on the shelf still bore my name. And for the first time in my life, I let myself cry. Not because I was broken, but because something was finally whole. The morning after the will was read, I found myself awake before sunrise. The house was quiet, like it had been holding its breath all night. I wrapped myself in a knit sweater I'd left in the closet years ago, still faintly smelling of cedar and dust, and wandered toward the back porch. There she was. My grandmother, Miriam, sitting at the old wicker table by the window, sipping black coffee from the same cracked mug she'd used since I was a child. Her posture was straighter than I remembered, her eyes sharper too. She didn't look at me right away, just said softly, "You're up early." I nodded, sliding into the chair across from her. I couldn't sleep. She gave a small smile. Truth has a way of stirring the soul. We sat there in silence for a while. The sun hadn't fully risen, but the sky was already shifting into that soft blue haze that comes right before the light breaks through. I wanted to ask her why Grandpa had chosen me, why he'd gone against what everyone expected. But I didn't need to. She answered before I even found the words. He saw himself in you. I turned to her. In me? She nodded. He spent his entire life trying to earn his parents' approval, worked 3 jobs, paid for his brother's tuition, put his dreams on a shelf and smiled while they gathered dust. And in the end, they still called him selfish when he moved away to start a new life with me. I had never heard that part of his story. No one had ever talked about Grandpa like that. Like someone who hurt, who was misunderstood, who chose peace over permission. Why didn't he ever say anything? I asked. Because pain doesn't always speak in words, Ellen. Sometimes it speaks through legacy. Her hand reached across the table, warm and strong. He left it to you, not because you needed it, but because you'd earned it long before you knew it was coming. He wanted you to build something that wasn't about proving anything to anyone, something that was yours. For the first time in days, my chest didn't feel like it was collapsing. I looked out the window where the early light touched the orange trees in the backyard. I used to play there as a kid, collecting the fallen fruit with Grandpa. He'd pretend they were golden treasures, hiding them under my arms like I was the keeper of something rare. I hadn't thought about that in years. I turned back to my grandmother. I don't even know what I'd build, I said, half to myself. You will, she replied. Just don't build it for them. That sentence lodged somewhere deep inside me. Don't build it for them. I had spent most of my adult life constructing a version of success designed to impress people who never really looked at me. I thought if I was enough, loud enough, smart enough, generous enough, they'd finally applaud. But what if applause was never the point? What if peace was? I didn't have the answers yet, but something had shifted. Later that day, I found Grandpa's old notebook in the bottom drawer of his desk. It was filled with ideas he never followed, places he wanted to visit, business concepts he had once believed in. The last page had a single line written in his signature blue ink. Just because they don't believe in it doesn't mean you shouldn't build it. I closed the notebook and held it to my chest. Maybe it was time to stop trying to earn my place at their table and start building my own. Later that evening, I found myself back in my grandfather's study. It was a modest room, 2 windows, a heavy oak desk, and a bookshelf that always seemed to sag under the weight of old hardcovers no one had touched in years. But now, standing in it again as an adult, it felt different. Not dusty or outdated. Sacred somehow, quietly waiting for something to be heard. I sat down at the desk and opened his notebook again. This time I flipped slowly. He had lists scribbled in crooked cursive. Nonprofit microloans for single moms. Fruit co-op for retired veterans. Mentorship camps for fatherless teens. Each idea was unfinished, a seed without soil. But the intent behind them? It was clear. He wanted to build something that meant something. I could feel it. And that feeling, it stayed with me long after I closed the notebook. That night, I barely slept. My mind wouldn't stop spinning. I thought about all the women I had mentored in finance over the years. Brilliant women who second-guessed themselves, who came from families that praised their brothers and dismissed their ambitions, who said things like, I just want to make my dad proud, even after becoming CFOs. It wasn't just me. This wound ran deep across generations, across cultures, a quiet epidemic of being overlooked, overworked, and underacknowledged. And the worst part? We rarely talked about it. We just swallowed it and kept performing. By sunrise, I had filled an entire page of my own notebook, not with answers, but with questions. What if I created a space for women like that? What if I built something not to impress, but to restore? What if my grandfather's legacy wasn't money, but clarity? I didn't know what it would look like yet, but I felt the shape of it forming inside me. The next afternoon, I drove into town and sat in a little cafe near the library, laptop open, coffee cooling by my elbow. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't working for someone else's deadline. I was building something for me. The name came quietly. Lantern, not spotlight, not torch. A lantern is soft, steady. It doesn't blind. It guides. It felt right. Lantern would be a nonprofit designed to help women, especially those dismissed by their families or overlooked in their careers, reclaim their inner light. We'd offer mentorship, microgrants, leadership training. But more than anything, we'd offer reflection, belief, community. I didn't want to save anyone. I just wanted to hand them the match. I called a former colleague, Alina, who had once told me that if I ever decided to leave corporate life, she wanted in. She picked up on the second ring. "I've been waiting for this call," she said, before I could finish pitching the idea. That night, I sketched a logo on a napkin, just a simple line drawing of a lantern with soft rays stretching out around it. I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't perfect, but it felt honest, grounded, like a promise I was finally ready to make to myself. I sent it to Alina. She replied within 2 minutes. "That's it. That's who you are. That's what we're building." I smiled. Not the polite kind I wore in boardrooms, but the kind that comes from somewhere deep in your chest, the kind that doesn't need anyone's permission. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was trying to escape my past. I felt like I was stepping toward my future. It was raining the morning Cole showed up. Not a light drizzle, the kind of steady, gray downpour that soaks through your clothes and makes everything feel heavier than it already is. I was sitting in the sunroom, laptop open, editing the mission statement for Lantern, when I saw his car pull into the driveway. I hadn't heard from him since the will reading. No calls, no texts, not even one of his usual vague, emoji-laden messages. I stayed seated, watched as he got out, jacket over his head, and walked slowly toward the porch like someone approaching a house that wasn't theirs. He knocked once, then again. Finally, I opened the door. "Hey," he said, dripping wet. "Cole?" I nodded, my voice flat. We stood there for a moment, him on the porch, me just inside, water pooled beneath his shoes. "I didn't know where else to go," he said. I stepped aside. He walked in, glancing around like the house had changed, like he wasn't sure if he belonged anymore. We sat in the kitchen, facing each other across the table. The same table where we used to fight over cereal boxes and whose turn it was to do the dishes. But that morning, everything felt foreign. He cleared his throat. "Look, I'm not here to fight." "Good," I said, closing my laptop. He exhaled. "I heard about Lantern. Mom told me. She thinks you're trying to prove something." I raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" He paused. "I don't know. I guess I used to think you were always trying to be better than me. Like, you were competing and I didn't even know we were playing the same game." I leaned back in my chair. "And now?" He looked down at his hands. "Now I'm not sure we were even playing the same sport." The rain picked up, tapping harder against the windows. He continued. "You've always been the one holding everything together. I used to joke about it, but the truth is, I think I was jealous. Not of your job or your success, but of how certain you seemed, how needed you were." I didn't speak. He went on. "When Grandpa left you the land, at first I was pissed. Not because I wanted it, but because it confirmed something I didn't want to face. That maybe you weren't just the serious one. Maybe you were the one he actually saw." That sentence caught me off guard. I expected deflection, sarcasm, maybe even blame, but not this. "And now?" I asked again, softer this time. He looked up. "Now I'm just trying to figure out who I am if I'm not the favorite." There it was. The mask slipped. For the first time in years, I saw my brother. Not the charming golden boy, not the screw-up hiding behind charm, but the boy underneath it all. Tired. Lost. Lonely in his own way. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he added quickly. I wanted to tell you I see it now. What it cost you. What I ignored." I nodded slowly. "I don't need you to fix it, Cole," I said. "But thank you for saying it." He gave a tight smile. "I don't want to be who I was. I'm not sure who I'll be next, but I know I can't go back." We sat in silence for a while after that. Not awkward, just real. Eventually, I stood up, poured him a cup of coffee, and slid it across the table. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. But for the first time in a long time, we were just two people. No roles, no hierarchy, no performance. Just a brother and a sister, trying. The day after Cole left, I felt different. Not healed, not whole, but lighter. Something had shifted during that conversation. Not because everything had been fixed, it hadn't, but because for the first time, I stopped waiting for an apology to grant me peace. I didn't forgive Cole in that kitchen. I forgave myself for holding on to resentment like it was oxygen. The truth is, anger had kept me warm for a long time. It gave me something to hold when I felt invisible. It told me I was right, that they were wrong, and that made me feel strong. But strength built on pain doesn't last. It calcifies. It isolates. Letting go didn't mean pretending nothing happened. It meant choosing not to carry the weight anymore. And with that space cleared, I could finally focus. Lantern wasn't just an idea anymore. It was becoming real. I spent the next few weeks working out of a spare bedroom in my grandfather's house, surrounded by the scent of old books and the hum of spring wind through cracked windows. I drafted vision statements, built spreadsheets, ran budget models late into the night. But none of it felt heavy. Not like the work I used to do. This wasn't a pitch. This was purpose. I reached out to women I'd mentored years before, asked them what kind of support would have changed their lives sooner. The answers were simple. I wish someone told me I wasn't crazy. I wish I had a space where I didn't have to explain myself. I wish I'd seen someone like me doing what I wanted to do. So that's what I built. Lantern would be that space, a network, a mentorship hub, a resource center. Not for women who needed saving, but for women who were ready to claim what had always been theirs: voice, power, possibility, and each part of the design, each policy, each program, it came from lived experience. No corporate jargon, no shiny brochures, just real stories, real needs, and a commitment to showing up honestly. One afternoon, while sketching a layout for the first virtual workshop, I found myself humming. Not a song, just a sound. Something calm, centered. I paused, realizing I hadn't felt that peaceful in years. That night, I called Alina. "I think we're ready to launch phase 1. She laughed on the other end of the line. "I've never heard you sound like this. Like, happy." I smiled. "I think I'm finally doing something that doesn't ask me to disappear." After we hung up, I opened an email draft. Subject: The Lantern Project. Recipients: 10 women I admired, some I'd worked with, some I barely knew but had watched rise quietly through storms of their own. I wrote, "We've all carried the weight of being overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed. Lantern isn't here to fix us. It's here to remind us we were never broken. I'm building this because I'm tired of playing small in rooms that were never built for me, and I don't think I'm alone. If this speaks to you, I'd love to talk." I hit send before I could overthink it. By morning, 7 had replied. By the end of the week, we had our first planning meeting scheduled. There was no turning back. And I didn't want to, because this time, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was creating something from the clearest place I'd ever stood in. Not out of bitterness, not out of competition, but out of truth. The day Lantern launched, there was no ribbon-cutting ceremony, no catered lunch, no press release. Just me, sitting at a kitchen table with a laptop and a cup of lukewarm coffee, staring at a website I'd built from scratch. The homepage had one sentence in bold: "You are not too much, you are not too late, you are not alone." It wasn't fancy, but it was real. I clicked publish. The screen refreshed. Just like that, it was live. It felt both monumental and ordinary. Like lighting a match in a dark room, not knowing how far the light would go, but knowing it started with you. That first week, 5 women signed up. The week after, it doubled. Then came the emails, some short. "Thank you. I needed this." Some long. My mother still tells me I should have become a nurse like my sister. I run a tech company now, but somehow I still carry that voice. Your story reminded me I'm allowed to live without her approval. And others just said, "I see myself in you." Those were the ones that stopped me in my tracks. Because for the first time, I wasn't performing. I wasn't trying to impress. I wasn't trying to earn love or attention or belonging. I was simply telling the truth. And the truth, as it turns out, has a way of finding its people. Alina and I hosted our first virtual circle 2 weeks after launch. We had 12 women from 9 different cities, all strangers on paper, but not in spirit. One woman spoke about being the oldest daughter and how no one ever asked her what she wanted. Another shared that her family never saw her art as a real job, even after she had a gallery show in New York. We cried, we laughed, we cursed a little, we listened a lot, and at the end of the call, no one wanted to hang up. That night I sat on my porch, wrapped in an old blanket, watching the sky change colors. There was no noise, no applause, just a deep, quiet joy. I wasn't healed, but I was home. Not in the physical sense, not in four walls or old furniture, but in the feeling that I had finally stepped into something that was mine, built from the broken pieces I used to hide, now arranged into something whole. Later that week, I mailed a handwritten letter to my grandmother. I told her about the launch, about the women, about the logo we sketched that now sat on the top of every page. At the bottom, I wrote, "Grandpa said to build something I believe in. I think he'd be proud of this." A few days later, I received a reply. Inside was a note card with just one line in her perfect cursive. "He'd say the light was always in you. You just stopped dimming it." I pressed the card to my chest and smiled. Lantern wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving to myself that I could live without waiting for the people who hurt me to come back and fix it. It was about stepping into the kind of peace that doesn't beg to be seen but shines anyway. And as more women joined, more stories came in, more lives started to shift. One thing became clear. You don't have to burn bridges to build something new. Sometimes you just light your own path and walk away from what no longer honors you. Her name was Mia, 23, soft-spoken, a painter from Ohio who'd grown up in a house where silence was mistaken for support, and being the quiet one meant no one bothered to ask what she dreamed of. She joined Lantern during our third cohort. At first, she barely spoke during the group sessions. Always logged in early, always had her camera on, always looked like she wanted to say something, but couldn't quite find the right moment. One afternoon, during a workshop on self-worth and creative risk, I invited the women to write down a dream they'd abandoned. No judgment, no explanations, just name it. Mia typed, "Art school." We asked her to tell us more. Her voice shook as she spoke. "I wanted to go when I was 18. I got accepted into 2 programs, but my dad said it was a waste of money. My mom said I wasn't talented enough, so I stayed home. Took a job at a local print shop. I haven't painted in almost 5 years." No one said anything right away. Then someone else whispered, "That's not nothing. That's grief." That moment stayed with all of us. 2 weeks later, Mia emailed me. She'd applied to a summer art program in Vermont. Just a workshop, she wrote. Nothing big. But her voice, written now in bolder sentences, sounded different, alive, hopeful. She got in, and when she shared the news with the group, we all cheered like it was our own victory. She held up the acceptance letter on screen, hands trembling. "I think this is the first decision I've made just for me," she said. I could barely respond. My throat tightened. My eyes welled up. Because that was the point of all of it. Not to fix anyone, not to give answers, just to hand someone a key they didn't know they already had. That same evening, I sat alone in the Lantern workspace. It was still a modest setup, 2 desks, a whiteboard, a few thrifted chairs and plants that somehow kept surviving despite our collective neglect. But to me, it felt sacred. I pulled up the photo Mia had sent, a close-up of her hands covered in cobalt blue and sienna red resting on a blank canvas. I stared at it for a long time. That's when I felt it. Not pride exactly, not accomplishment. It was something quieter, fuller. A kind of joy that didn't need applause. I thought back to the boardrooms I used to sit in. The titles, the bonuses, the perfectly rehearsed speeches that landed in rooms full of men who nodded politely but never really listened. And then I thought about this. A girl with paint on her fingers and a dream that refused to die. I had chosen right. I didn't need a trophy. I had this. I had her. I had myself. That was the moment I knew Lantern wasn't just working, it was living. Cole moved out in early June. No announcement, no family meeting, just a quiet text. "Found a place. Nothing fancy, but it's mine." It came out of nowhere, but also, it didn't. Something had been shifting in him since that rainy morning in my kitchen. Not all at once. Not dramatically, but slow and steady, like a river cutting through stone, inch by inch. He'd started taking contract work, freelance graphic design jobs he found online. They didn't pay much, but he was doing them on his own, without Dad, without shortcuts, just himself and his laptop at the kitchen table. When he moved into a small 1-bedroom apartment above a bakery on Elm Street, he invited me over for dinner. I almost didn't go. Part of me still carried the memory of birthday parties where I was forgotten, holidays where he got the biggest gift, and I got a pat on the back. I wasn't sure if I could sit across from him without feeling all of it crawl back up my spine, but I went anyway. When I walked in, he was burning garlic in a too small skillet and trying to act like he had it all under control. We both laughed when the smoke alarm went off. Dinner was basic. Pasta, overcooked vegetables, and a bottle of cheap wine he picked out because it had a cool label. But I couldn't stop smiling. It was the first time we were together without roles to play. Not the golden child and the ghost. Not the charming one and the one who tried too hard. Just Cole and Ellen, brother and sister, two people trying to figure it out. We ate on the floor because he didn't have a table yet. "Did I ever tell you I used to watch you leave for work?" he asked mid-bite. I looked up, surprised. "You always looked so certain, like the world made sense when you walked into it." I shook my head. "It didn't. I just learned how to pretend." He nodded slowly. "I'm still learning." That moment, quiet, unpolished, honest, felt bigger than any apology he could have given. I wasn't waiting for a speech anymore. I didn't need him to dig up the past and make it pretty. I just needed to see that he was trying, that he was becoming someone he could be proud of, and in doing that, he was showing me the version of himself I'd hoped for all along. We didn't talk about the will, or the fight, or the years of distance. We talked about his neighbor who played jazz too loud, about the bakery downstairs, about how he was saving for a used coffee table, and when I left, he walked me to the door. "Thanks for coming," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "It means a lot." I smiled. It means something to me too. As I drove home, windows down, night air brushing across my face, I realized something. Forgiveness doesn't always arrive with a grand gesture. Sometimes it slips in quietly, over a bowl of bad pasta, and reminds you that healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about choosing to build something better in the present. And for the first time, I wasn't holding my breath around Cole. I was just breathing. The first public lantern event was small, just a community gathering at a local co-working space. We had folding chairs, printed name tags, and a table of donated pastries from the bakery down the street. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. We'd invited a few partners, local women's groups, and former mentees to share their stories. I wore a plain navy dress and flats, no podium, no teleprompter, just a microphone and a heart that wouldn't stop racing. 15 minutes before the program started, I spotted them. My parents. Standing near the back, Dad in a stiff blazer that didn't quite fit right. Mom in her favorite ivory coat, the one she wore to every family event that mattered. They weren't on the list. They hadn't RSVP'd. They were just there. I froze. It wasn't anger I felt. It wasn't even fear. It was something quieter, a kind of ache. The ache of being seen, but too late. Alina touched my arm. "You okay?" I nodded. "They won't make a scene," I said. "That's never been their style." She raised an eyebrow. "But you might." I smiled. "Not today." When it was my turn to speak, I walked up slowly, hands steady. I looked out into the crowd. There were people who believed in me sitting in those chairs. People who had cried in our virtual circles, who had trusted me with their most hidden hopes, and in the back were two people who never really knew me. I didn't acknowledge them, not out of spite, but because that moment wasn't about them. It was about everything I had built from the silence they left behind. I spoke from the heart, about the women who'd reclaimed their voices, about Mia and her paint-stained fingers, about daughters who were never the favorite but found ways to favor themselves. I spoke about choosing yourself, not once, but every day, until it feels like breathing. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. I stepped off stage, heart pounding, body warm. As the event wrapped up, I mingled, smiled, thanked people for coming. I didn't go looking for my parents, but eventually I saw them. They were near the exit, holding small paper cups of lukewarm coffee, not speaking. Our eyes met. Dad gave a small nod. Mom opened her mouth like she might say something, then closed it again. I walked toward them, not quickly, not timidly, just with presence. When I reached them, I smiled. "Thanks for coming." Dad cleared his throat. "You seem happy." I nodded. "I am." He hesitated. "We didn't expect all this." I shrugged gently. "I didn't either, but it's real." Mom shifted her purse on her arm. Her eyes scanned the room. "Well," she said, "you always did like your projects." It was meant to sting, but it didn't. Not anymore. I smiled again. "Not for them. For me." "I do like this one," I said. "Very much." Then I turned and walked away. Not in anger, not in triumph, just in peace. Because the truth is, sometimes you don't get the moment you always hoped for. Sometimes they never say sorry, Never admit they were wrong, never become the people you needed, and still you rise. Still, you choose yourself. Still, you walk out of the room knowing exactly who you are. And that's enough. I didn't cry that night. After the event, after the last guest left and the chairs were stacked and the leftover cookies packed into brown paper bags, I sat alone in the back of the room, watching the string lights above me flicker softly. There was no dramatic release, no breakdown, just a long, steady exhale. Like my body had finally understood something my mind had been chasing for years. I didn't need their approval anymore, and that realization didn't feel cold. It didn't feel bitter. It felt clean, freeing, like when you take off a coat you've been wearing for too long, one that looked good to others but never quite fit you right. I had spent so much of my life orbiting the idea that if I just worked harder, achieved more, softened my edges, then one day they would see me. But I wasn't waiting at the window anymore. I was outside, walking into my own morning. A few days later I got a letter in the mail, handwritten, no return address. It was from my grandmother, just one page. She wrote, "I saw how you looked at them, calm, clear, not cruel. I wish I had learned that sooner. Your grandfather would be proud." I am too. There were no instructions, no advice, just love. And that, somehow, felt bigger than all the words my parents hadn't said. That weekend I took a walk through the orchard behind the house, the same one I used to run through as a child, chasing the smell of oranges and the sound of my grandfather's laughter. Everything looked smaller now, the trees a little thinner, the soil drier. But the light, God, the light, was golden. I sat under the old fig tree, the one with the cracked swing still hanging by one chain. I closed my eyes and listened. To birds, to wind, to the stillness. I wasn't lonely, I was alone, and that was different. Because now solitude didn't mean absence, it meant presence, with myself. With this new life I was building, not to escape the old one, but to honor who I had become despite it. Later that evening, Cole called. He didn't say much, just asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime. I said yes. No expectations, just siblings showing up. I hung up and looked around my living room. No longer my grandfather's, not entirely mine yet, but something new in between. A place in progress, like me. I poured a glass of wine, sat by the window, watched the last pink streaks of sunset disappear into a navy sky. And in that moment I felt something I hadn't known I was searching for. Not victory, not closure, but quiet. Not the kind that comes from silence, the kind that comes from peace. Somewhere in Montana, a girl named Erin stood on a stage and told a room full of strangers that she had spent most of her life trying to be small. She talked about how her father said, "Confidence looks ugly on a girl," and how her mother would lower her voice every time she got excited about something. She was 19, the youngest in our mentorship circle. She spoke with her whole body, hands moving, voice shaking, but steady. "I used to think power belonged to someone else," she said. "Now I know I had it all along. I just needed someone to remind me." In the front row, I sat with my notebook open, but I wasn't writing. I was listening, really listening. That was always the thing about Lantern. It was never about me. I lit the first flame, yes, but they kept it burning. 2 years in, we had helped over 700 women across 12 states. Not saved, not rescued, helped. There's a difference. We offered workshops, peer circles, mentorships, grant referrals. But more than anything, we offered each other. Proof that you don't have to be loud to lead, that your story doesn't have to be tidy to be powerful. That healing isn't something you achieve, it's something you practice, every day. We hosted our first in-person retreat that spring. It wasn't fancy. A rented lodge in the Blue Ridge Mountains, twin beds and mismatched coffee mugs and Wi-Fi that barely worked. But it didn't matter. Because the real connection didn't need a screen. There was something holy about watching women who had once been strangers pass tissues, pour tea, hold space for each other without needing to fix it. On the second night, we sat around a bonfire and wrote down one thing we were ready to release. Control, shame, guilt, fear, silence. Each word folded into a scrap of paper and tossed into the flames. As the smoke rose, so did something else. Relief. It wasn't magic. It was memory being rewritten. It was what happens when truth meets safety. Back in my room that night, I looked at the notes tacked onto the corkboard. Drawings, quotes, photos of daughters and mothers and mentors who had made it possible. And in the center, a sticky note with my own handwriting. Build what you needed when you were younger. That had been my compass from the beginning. Not a blueprint, just a direction. I didn't always know what I was doing. Some nights I'd cry over funding rejections. Other times I'd question if I was just running away from my past in a prettier costume. But then I'd get an email. Like the one from Delilah, a single mom in Phoenix who wrote, "I used to think I had to be both soft and invisible. Now I know I can be soft and seen." Or Camila, who finally launched her photography business after 15 years of being told to find something more secure. These weren't just success stories, they were awakenings, and I got to witness them, to hold them, to multiply them. One story at a time. That, more than any inheritance, was the legacy I wanted. Not a family name carved into a building, but hundreds of voices rising gently but unmistakably saying, "I belong here. I'm worthy. I'm enough." And every time I heard those words come from someone else's lips, I whispered them again to myself. Not because I doubted, but because I remembered. Cole showed up on a Thursday with 2 bags of groceries and a 6-pack of ginger beer. He didn't call first, just knocked, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "I thought you might be too busy to cook," he said, stepping into the kitchen like he'd always belonged there. I raised an eyebrow. "You cook now?" He grinned. "I'm working on it." He pulled out pasta, garlic, a bundle of fresh basil, and, oddly, 3 lemons. "What's with the lemons?" He shrugged. They were on sale. Felt optimistic. We didn't talk about anything deep at first, just simmering sauces and what show we were watching and how neither of us understood how to fold a fitted sheet. But somewhere between chopping and stirring, the quiet settled in. Not the awkward kind, the kind that feels safe. He set the table while I lit a candle from a retreat gift bag. It smelled like cedar and peace. When we sat down, he glanced around. "You've made this place really warm," he said. I nodded. It took a while, but yeah, it finally feels like home. We ate slowly. No rush, no tension, just 2 people who'd started over. At one point, he looked up from his plate and said, almost too casually, "I read the article about Lantern in the paper." I froze for a second. "Oh?" He nodded. "Yeah, it was good. You were good." I smiled, not sure what to say. Then he added, "It made me proud. I just wanted you to know that." I felt something loosen in my chest. He didn't have to say that. He didn't owe me anything. But he did. And it landed. Not like a grand gesture. More like a quiet apology dressed as affirmation. Later, we sat on the porch, sharing the last lemon in slices like we used to when we were kids. He asked about some of the women in the program. I told him about Erin, about Mia, about a new teen group we were piloting in Detroit. He listened, really listened, not out of politeness, but out of curiosity. "Did you ever think it'd look like this?" he asked. "No," I said, "but I think Grandpa did." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think he saw it before any of us did." The wind picked up, and for a moment we sat in silence, letting it wrap around us. "I've been thinking about going back to school," he said. I turned to him. "For design? Maybe. Or maybe community development. I don't know yet, but I want to build something too." That sentence felt like music. Not because it meant he was following in my footsteps, but because it meant he was finding his own. He stood to leave not long after. No long goodbyes, just a hug, firm and simple. "Thanks for dinner," he said. "Thanks for the lemons," I replied. We both laughed. As I closed the door behind him, I didn't feel the usual ache of unfinished business. Because the truth was, we weren't unfinished anymore. We were just in progress. And that was enough. We weren't trying to rewrite childhood or make perfect peace out of chaos. We were simply learning to love each other as we were now, not who we used to be. And in that process, something softer had grown between us. Not a replacement for what we lost, but a new kind of bond. One built on real time, on choice, on showing up when it mattered, even if it was just for pasta and lemons on a Thursday night. It happened at the city's Community Recognition Gala. Lantern had been nominated for a Civic Impact Award. I didn't expect to win. We weren't flashy, we didn't have big sponsors or headlines, but we had stories, and sometimes stories are enough. The venue was a repurposed library downtown. High ceilings, exposed brick. A jazz trio played near the back. The crowd was buzzing with chatter, name tags, handshakes, the smell of catered food and ambition. I was wearing a dark green jumpsuit and my grandmother's earrings. Something about the combination made me feel rooted. Not fancy, just grounded. They arrived sometime after the program started. I didn't see them walk in, but I felt it, the shift in the air. I turned and there they were, my parents, standing near the refreshments table. My father looked stiff, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the crowd. My mother clutched a brochure pretending to read. They weren't invited, but they came. Part of me braced for something, a comment, a confrontation, a look that would knock me off balance, but none of that came. Instead, I felt calm, not detached, not cold, just still. When Lantern's name was called, I walked to the front with Alina. We didn't make a speech, just accepted the plaque, smiled for the camera, and took our seats again. But in that short walk back through the aisle, I passed right by them. My mother looked up. Her eyes met mine. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She just looked. For the first time in my life, I didn't scan that look for meaning. I didn't search for a nod of approval or a flicker of pride. I just saw her. And I kept walking. Later, as the crowd thinned and people began to leave, I stepped outside into the night. The air was cool, clean. I stood near a row of potted lavender, watching people drift into cars and conversations. That's when I felt a presence beside me. Not close, just nearby. My father. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just looked up at the moon. "I remember when you were 12, he said finally. "You gave a speech at school about helping animals. You were so serious. Said you wanted to build a wildlife sanctuary. We laughed about it on the drive home." I didn't respond. He continued. I didn't realize how much that probably hurt. I still said nothing, because some wounds don't need words anymore. They've already scarred over. He nodded to himself, then turned to go, but before he did, he added, "What you've built here, it matters, even if we didn't see it coming." I nodded, not in gratitude, not in closure, just in acknowledgement, because I wasn't waiting for healing from them anymore. That wasn't their job, it never was. Healing had been mine all along, and I had done it, not in perfect lines, but in slow, steady curves that bent toward freedom. As I walked back inside, someone called my name, one of the mentees. Her first time at a public event, nervous, glowing. She wanted a photo. I smiled wide. Of course. We stood under the soft string lights. Someone snapped the picture. She hugged me after, quick and tight, like she didn't want to let go. I knew that feeling, because I used to think if you held on tight enough to people, they'd stay. But now I know, sometimes the only way to stay is to finally let go. 2 years passed. I didn't even notice at first. Life had become so full, of work that mattered, of people who showed up, of silence that no longer felt like punishment. Lantern kept growing. Not wildly, not like some overnight miracle, but steadily, like roots beneath the surface. Every week I'd receive updates from our chapters. Photos of teen girls leading community projects, single mothers launching their own businesses, women writing books, starting podcasts, applying to grad schools they were once too afraid to even tour. I stopped trying to track every detail. I didn't need to be everywhere anymore. That had never been the point. Lantern wasn't about me. It was about the echo. And that echo was getting louder. There was Maria from San Diego, who once whispered in our Zoom sessions and now stood on stages with a microphone in hand, sharing her story like it was her superpower. There was Trin in Houston, who sent me a photo of her acceptance letter to nursing school with a sticky note on it that read, "Because you said I could." And then there was Nadine, 17, quiet, brilliant. She had joined our youth mentorship pilot just 6 months earlier. One of those girls who didn't talk much but noticed everything. One afternoon, she gave me a folded sheet of paper. No words, just a smile and a quick shrug before she disappeared into the workshop room. On the paper, she had drawn a lantern. Detailed, delicate. Inside the lantern wasn't fire, but people. Girls, women, arms linked, holding each other up. At the bottom, she had written, "Thank you for lighting the first one." I sat in my office that night, staring at the drawing for a long time, because it hit me. I hadn't just escaped my old story, I had rewritten the ending. Not with revenge, not with proof, but with presence. I hadn't burned bridges, I had built beacons. And the light wasn't just mine anymore, it belonged to all of us. My new office wasn't grand, just a corner space on the 3rd floor of an old brick building with creaky floors and too many windows. But that's what I loved about it. The light poured in like it had nowhere else to be. Most afternoons, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the world go about its business. Cars honking, kids running past on the sidewalk, birds weaving in and out of the maple trees just outside. There was something sacred about the ordinariness of it all. The desk was cluttered with things that had nothing to do with strategy or funding. Thank you notes from mentees, small drawings, a pressed flower from the retreat in Asheville, a ceramic owl someone made for me out of gratitude. I used to think leadership meant always being in motion. Now I knew it could also mean being still, not idle, but present. One afternoon I found myself staring out the window longer than usual. There was a storm rolling in, thick gray clouds stretching across the sky like slow-moving waves, the kind of weather that makes you want to turn inward. And so I did. I thought about the version of me who used to beg for a seat at the table, who used to rehearse every word before family dinners, who used to count the number of times she was interrupted or overlooked. That girl had worked so hard to be visible. But the woman sitting by this window, she didn't need to be seen by anyone to know she existed. She felt herself, in the weight of her breath, in the rhythm of her days, in the lives blooming quietly around her. The storm outside cracked open and rain began to fall. Soft at first, then steady. I smiled and reached for a pen. Not to write a plan, not to draft a proposal, just to write, because sometimes healing sounds like your own pen on paper. No audience, no outcome, just you, finally listening. And in that quiet moment, with the rain tapping at the glass and the world going on around me, I whispered something I hadn't said in years. I'm home. The auditorium was full, not packed like a concert, but full in a different way. Full of people who carried quiet courage. Women, men, young adults, elders, some in suits, others in sneakers, all holding one thing in common: they came because they believed in healing. I stood backstage holding a simple card in my hand. On it were 3 sentences. That was all I planned to say. When my name was called, I stepped into the light. It wasn't the spotlight that felt powerful. It was the stillness of the crowd, the way their silence held space. I looked out and saw faces I didn't know but somehow recognized. People who had walked their own hard roads, people who knew what it meant to be unseen, unheard, unchosen. And yet, here we were, together, rising. I cleared my throat, smiled. My name is Ellen, I said, and I used to think I had to burn everything down to be free. I held up the card. But I've learned this instead. You don't have to destroy the past to create the future. You just have to stop letting it define you. Applause. Not wild, but warm. Real. I stepped back, letting the sound wash over me. From the front row, I saw a girl who looked barely 16, nodding like she'd just heard something that made her spine sit taller. And I knew this story wasn't just mine anymore. It belongs to all of us. To anyone who's ever been left out, looked past, or told they weren't enough. So if you're hearing this now, and it stirs something in you, let that be the beginning. Start your own lantern. Speak the truth you were told to hide. Choose yourself, even if no one claps when you do, because light doesn't need permission to shine. It only needs one person brave enough to carry it forward. Let that person be you.